There are some films which should begin with a trigger warning instead of a disclaimer. Tere Ishk Mein, written by Himanshu Sharma and directed by Aanand L Rai, is not one of those films. This film is so much more terribly and shockingly provocative that every scene should come with a trigger warning. Literally, every scene needs a graphic below which reads, "This film is injurious to your health, intellect, and general well being." I almost believed that one or more characters would break the fourth wall and just say to us, "Why are you still watching us?" By the end, I fully expected Aanand L Rai to show up on screen laughing at us, the audience, much like Rohit Shetty used to do back in the day in his Golmaal comedies. I wish it was that self-aware. There is none, but still, let's try and cut to insight.
मेरा जी उब गया है इस बेचौध प्यार से मुझे बस लड़ना है.
Before I start talking about the film, I have a story to share of me and Aanand L Rai. Don't worry, this is not me straying away from the subject of this video. Unlike the film, my story is actually relevant to the point I'm trying to make. Back in 2019, 4 months after the release and failure of Zero, I was speaking to someone on Twitter about where Zero stands in the filmography of the director whose successful streak as a filmmaker had come to a halt. At some point in the Twitter thread, I noticed and mentioned on my timeline how Aanand L Rai's Twitter bio read director of Tanu Weds Manu, Raanjhanaa and Tanu Weds Manu Returns, and that he had not written Zero in his bio because the film flopped at the box office. Look, I was young, reckless, ranting, naive, and an upset fan with a free Wi-Fi. But within 4 hours of my tweet, Aanand L Rai had changed his Twitter bio to director of Zero only, which if you go and check is the same to date. At some point in the thread, I realized that someone had tagged him and that the tweets may have reached him. It was too timely to be a coincidence. This is to say that here is a director who has a pulse on what people have to say about him and his work. Tere Ishq Mein takes off with a scene in Leh Ladakh where Dhanush, who is Shankar here, is flying a fighter jet as an Indian Air Force combat pilot. He receives a message from the command room that he's flying too low on altitude. Immediately, Shankar lifts his jet off and flies it vertically upwards, making it look like a rocket leaving the Earth's atmosphere. Upon doing this, he is reprimanded by the officer in the control room saying that he's too high, pun intended, and that he needs to climb down to an acceptable altitude. This scene is Aanand L Rai and Himanshu Sharma quite obviously and cheekily self-referencing their own journey and relationship with the audience from Raanjhanaa to Zero to Atrangi Re. From flying low and successfully with actors like Dhanush, Madhavan, Kangna, Mohammad Zishan Ayub and Swara Bhaskar in the streets of Delhi and UP to flying high and dangerously towards Mars with SRK, the writer-director duo was pulled back by the audience after Zero and asked to stay in their lane. That led to their subsequent films being set in the familiar territory of North India. Despite its many issues, Atrangi Re, for me at least, was a return to form for the duo with the most enjoyable mainstream Hindi film of 2021. I watched it thrice in the first 3 days upon its release and was completely charmed by the playfulness and magical realism of the film. Music by A.R. Rahman was just the clincher. But with Tere Ishq Mein, Aanand L Rai and Himanshu Sharma have gone too far. They've now hit escape velocity and there's no return to the land of redemption now. And the signs were all there. I should have never trusted a film that spelled Ishq with K and not Q. I should have known that Dhanush playing a jilted lover again in 2025 in a post-Vanga world was not the best idea. I should have seen it coming when another Dhanush and Aanand L Rai collaboration, their third, was set in North India. How many times can you pass off Dhanush's Hindi accent with the character trope of a Tamilian in North India? 3 is not the answer. It was clever in Raanjhanaa, acceptable in Atrangi Re, but outright lazy in Tere Ishq Mein. I should have seen it coming when a 42-year-old Dhanush is cast as a college-going lover boy, but then mainstream Bollywood has erased the concept of aging superstars for me. When I sat in the theatre, I wasn't aware that my pen had run out of its ink. So when the movie began and I reached out for my notepad and this pen to write notes for this review, I did not know how lucky my notepad was going to be today. When the film ended, it occurred to me that fate had intervened to save my notepad from being exposed to the harebrained and rotten ideas of this film. The gods of film criticism, pens, notepads, and filmmaking knew that if I started to take down pointers on this film, I would have ended up writing the mind-numbing and nonsensical screenplay. A screenplay that thinks itself to be a sweeping, romantic saga, but in the words of Prakash Raj, who plays Dhanush's father in the film, is actually a sweeping, smelly and noxious fart. Eventually I took down some notes in my phone and I'll let you know what those pointers are towards the end of the review. Kriti Sanon plays Mukti, the worst student of behavioral psychology to have ever existed. She puts the psycho in psychopath and the logi in psychology. She plays a PhD student in the film whose thesis posits that all forms of violence can be conquered and cured, except for the cinematic violence that this film unleashes upon its audience. So Mukti uses Shankar as the subject of her study to turn him into a non-violent person. Her thesis is so hilariously weak that her solution is to beg her subject to not be violent or bribe him with sex. The rest of the film emerges from this stupid plot contrivance and leads to Shankar joining the Air Force, where everyone is clueless and useless. Even Vineet Kumar Singh doesn't know what to do. No wonder the country is at war. Only Shankar knows what to do because he made a pit stop at UPSC along his journey. Suddenly the transition of Shah Rukh Khan in Jab Tak Hai Jaan from a man waiting tables and clearing snow in London to an Indian Army officer does not seem so jarring. The entire screenplay of Tere Ishq Mein is hinged on the double point agenda of evoking and provoking by any means possible. The presence of Dhanush in an Aanand L Rai film, an interfaith wedding with the third wheel of the story, and the trademark toxic masculinity and love evoke a range of films from Tanu Weds Manu, Raanjhanaa and Atrangi Re. The leap of faith from a jobless prick in Delhi to an Indian Air Force pilot evokes the parallels of Baua Singh from Zero. Except here, the leap in the leap of faith is legless and the faith is corrupted. A pregnant Kriti Sanon with an absent father of the child evokes the Mimi connection. An attempt to crack UPSC in one song montage spanning over 3 years is an entire 12th fail in itself. The Prakash Raj and Dhanush father-son duo with an absent mother figure is straight out of Tiruchitrambalam. Tota Roy Chaudhary, playing a father disapproving of his daughter's suitor, should evoke Rocky or Rani Ki Prem Kahani, but he plays it like a hammy 80s villain, which reminds me of his role in Black Warrant. And lest you forget, Mohammad Zishan Ayub shows up to underline that this is the same universe as that of Raanjhanaa. And when the film is not evoking, every scene is provoking and arm-twisting the viewer into believing that a complicated and disturbing story of a one-sided love affair is being told. The casual display of smoking and drinking while pregnant is triggering and disturbing, but unfortunately those are not the only highly questionable choices that the film and its character Mukti makes. Even on a technical level, the film is nothing but atrocious. The sound design of the film is non-existent at some places, and the constant evoking of the cast and crew's previous filmography alters the tempo of Tere Ishq Mein to mimic that of the final film of a multi-part saga. It plays like part 2 of a film whose part 1 was every film ever on unresolved trauma. The story behaves as if it's 2 steps ahead of the curve as if it's a batter who walks around the crease like a centurion, when in reality he's struggling to put bat on ball. This design of the film could be intentional given that the lead character Shankar is someone who thinks too highly of himself before being cut to size, but this is not the kind of immersive experience that the makers want to give us. And so much for the hyper masculinity that they cannot name Pakistan and have to dub it to China. Yeah, there is a whole war going on in the backdrop while Kriti Sanon makes sure to tell us that there's a war going on between the characters as well. Look, my equation with Aanand L Rai and Himanshu Sharma films hasn't been too bad so far. With the exception of Zero and Raksha Bandhan, I have bought into all of their movies since Tanu Weds Manu. The strike rate is exactly 66.6% in my case, which I now realize is the number of Satan. Their films are always rooted and aware of the socio-politics of North India, but they're also visibly oblivious of the problematic gender politics of their own narratives. And this stems from a clear lack of a female voice in the writer's room. If Raanjhanaa was a refreshingly arresting film back in the pre-woke era, Tere Ishk Mein should be arrested for harassment in 2025, and the bail amount should be set to the total box office collection of this film. Multiple times in the second half, I looked around in the dark of the theatre at the 7 people in my show to see if I was the only one being traumatized by this film. Thankfully, even the 2 middle-aged Indian ladies sitting in front of me who were talking about how they loved Kabir Singh before the start of the show did not leave the theatre without professing how terrible and unbearable Tere Ishq Mein was. Which brings me to the pointers I had noted down on my phone during the film. Psychology for Dummies, Army for Dummies, War for Dummies, Harebrained, Tamilian in North India fatigue, UPSC fatigue, Pagal Kutte Ne Kaata. Yeah, that happens at one point in the film. Anjam, Jab Tak Hai Jaan, Kabir Singh, Animal, and Black Friday. Not the Anurag Kashyap movie, or the shopping sale on the day after the holiday of Thanksgiving. Tere Ishq Mein is a Black Friday at the movies. This is by far the worst mainstream Hindi film of the year by a legit director, not Milab Zaveri, and a top contender for one of the worst movies of the decade. In an ideal world, this should be the last film of everyone involved in the making of it. But my toxic relationship with Aanand L Rai films tells me that he's gonna come back 3 years later. It'll be 2028. But for now, stay away from a theatre near you.